Y'all know what time it is. Woo! Get into it! Get into it! Yes! Right, done it right on the first try this time. I hope everybody is having a lovely evening, which I have to be very clear, I do not own the music you are listening to in the background. And we are back to the Neverending Story, but now we're about to start the second half of this book. There's only 26 chapters, so we only have 13 more chapters and we're done. Which I already have our next book planned, which, if anybody knows me well over the years, I've had a huge fascination with Welsh mythology. I've had a huge fascination with mythology. Reason being, from a young age, I remember watching Disney's The Black Cauldron, which I later found out in elementary school as well as middle school. It is based off a book series called The Prydain Chronicles. I feel like I'm far away. Hold on one sec. Okay, that's a lot better. So, with The Prydain Chronicles by Lloyd Alexander, who is one of my favorite authors of all time, who has also written one of my favorite books of all time, The Remarkable Journey of Prince Jen, which we will read on this channel. It's an amazing story. It really is good, though. Like, seriously, The Remarkable Journey. My youngest brother could tell you, anytime we've gone to the library, that was one of the audiobooks or novels that I picked up every single time. It's an amazing story. That and The Engineer of Beasts. That's another really good book, but that'll be for Instagram and not for Facebook. It's a bit more maturing content. It's like upper teens level of reading. So it's like from age 15 and 18. So, saying all that to say is that the next series of books we will be reading are the Prydain Chronicles. I have all of the books except for one, which I've ordered, which I'm waiting for that to come in. But yes, if any of you, and I repeat this, if any of you have specific books, like for this summer, I definitely want to read some Gary Soto books. Gary Soto is one of my favorite authors as well. Just love his inclusionary storytelling about his inner city life, living as a Mexican American. Like, we'll do that. Definitely gonna read Stuart Little, Charlotte's Web, The Wind in the Willows. Probably when spring comes around, officially, we'll read The Wind in the Willows. It's not that long of a book, so that'll be fun. But yes, on here specifically, after we finish the Neverending Story, Lloyd Alexander's The Prydain Chronicles, starting with the Book of Three, will be what we will read next. Now, without further ado, and no more mincing on my part, we will begin the story. Chapter 13. Paralyn, the Night Forest. Moonchild, I'm coming! Bastian repeated in the darkness. He felt something indescribably sweet and comforting flow into him from the name and fill his whole being. So he said it again and again. Moonchild! Moonchild! I'm coming! Moonchild! Here I am! But where was he? He couldn't see the slightest ray of light, but there was no longer the freezing darkness of the attic. This was a warm, velvety darkness in which he felt safe and happy. All fear and dread had left him, ceased to be anything more than a distant memory. He felt so light and gay that he even laughed softly. Moonchild, where am I? He asked. He no longer felt the weight of his body. He groped about and realized that he was hovering in midair. The mats were gone and there was no ground under his feet. It was a wonderful feeling, a sense of release and boundless freedom that he had never known before. He was beyond the reach of all the things that had weighed him down and hemmed him in. Could he be hovering somewhere in the cosmos? But in the cosmos there were stars, and here there was nothing of the kind, but there were only this velvety darkness and a wonderful, happy feeling he hadn't known in all his life. Could it be that he was dead? Moonchild, where are you? And then he heard a delicate, bird-like voice that answered him, and that may have answered him several times without his hearing it. It seemed very near, and yet he could not have said from which direction it came.
Here I am, Bastian.
Is it you, Moonchild? She laughed in a strangely lilting way.
Who else would I be? Why, you've just given me my lovely name. Thank you for it. Welcome, my savior, my hero.
Where are we, Moonchild?
I am with you, and you are with me.
Dream words, yet Bastian knew for sure that he was awake and not dreaming. Moonchild, is this the end?
No,
she replied.
It's the beginning.
Where's Fantastica, Moonchild? Where are all the others? Where are Atreyu and Falcor? What about the old man of Wandering Mountain and his book? Don't they exist anymore?
Fantastica will be born again from your wishes, my Bastian. Through me, they will become reality.
From my wishes? Bastian repeated in amazement. He heard the sweet voice reply,
You know they called me the Commander of Wishes. What will you wish?
Bastian thought a moment. Then he inquired cautiously, How many wishes have I got?
As many as you want. The more, the better, my Bastian. Fantastica will be all the more rich and varied.
Bastian was overjoyed, but just because so infinitely many possibilities had suddenly been held out to him, he couldn't think of a single wish. I can't think of anything, he said finally. For a time there was silence. Then he heard the bird-like voice say,
That's bad.
Why?
Because then there won't be any more Fantastica.
Bastian made no answer. He felt confused. His sense of unlimited freedom was somewhat marred by the thought that everything depended on him. Why is it so dark, Moonchild? He asked.
The beginning is always dark.
My Bastian, I'd awfully like to see you again, Moonchild, the way you were when you looked at me. Again he heard the soft, lilting laugh. Why are you laughing?
Because I am happy.
Happy? Why?
You've just made your first wish.
Will it make it come true? He held out his hand and felt she was putting something into it. Something very small but strangely heavy. It was very cold and felt hard and dead. What is it, Moonchild?
A grain of sand,
she replied.
All that's left of my boundless realm. I make you a present of it.
Thank you, said Bastian, bewildered. What on earth could he do with such a gift? If at least it had been something living. As he was mulling it over, he felt something wriggling in his hand. He raised his hand to see what it was. Look, Moonchild. It's glowing and glittering. And there, look! A little flame is coming out of it. No, it's not a grain of sand. It's a seed. It's a luminous seed. It's starting to sprout.
Well done, my Bastian,
he heard her say.
You see how easy it is for you.
Barely perceptible at first, the glow of the speck in Bastian's palm grew quickly, making the two child faces so very different from each other gleam in the velvety darkness. Slowly, Bastian withdrew his hand, and the glittering speck hovered between them like a tiny star. The seed sprouted so quickly that no one could see it grow. It put forth leaves and a stem and buds that burst into many-colored, phosphorescent flowers. Little fruits formed, ripened, and exploded like miniature rockets, spraying new seeds all over them. From the new seeds grew other plants, but these had different shapes. Some were like ferns or small palms, others like cacti, bulrushes, or gnarled trees. Each glowed a different color. Soon the velvety darkness all around Bastian and Moonchild, over and under them and on every side, was filled with rapidly growing luminous plants. A globe of radiant colors, a new luminous world hovered in the nowhere, and grew, and in its innermost center, Bastian and Moonchild sat hand in hand, looking around them with eyes of wonder. Unceasingly, new shapes and colors appeared. Larger and larger blossoms opened, richer and richer clusters formed, and all this in total silence. Soon some of the plants were as big as fruit trees. There were fans of long emerald green leaves, flowers resembling peacock tails with rainbow-colored eyes, pagodas consisting of superimposed umbrellas of violet silk. Thick stems were interwoven like braids. Soon they were transparent. They looked like pink glass lit up from within. Some of the blooms looked like clusters of blue and yellow Japanese lanterns, and little by little, as the luminous night growths grew denser, they intertwined to form a tissue of soft light.
You must give all this a name,
Moonchild whispered. Bastian nodded. Parolin! The Night Forest, he said. He looked into the childlike Empress's eyes, and once again, as if their first exchange of glances, he sat spellbound, unable to take his eyes off of her. The first time she had been deathly ill. Now she was much, much more beautiful. Her torn gown was whole again. The soft-colored light played over the pure whiteness of the silk and of her long hair. His wish had come true. Bastian's eyes swam. Moonchild? He stammered. Are you well again? She smiled.
Can't you see that I am?
I wish everything would stay like this forever, he said.
The moment is forever,
she replied. Bastian was silent. He didn't understand what she had said, but he was in no mood to puzzle it out. He wanted only to sit there looking at her. Little by little, the thicket of luminous plants had formed a huge, thick hedge around them. As though imprisoned in a tent of magic carpets, Bastian paid no attention to what was happening outside. He didn't realize that Parolin was growing and growing, that each and every plant was getting big or bigger. Seeds no bigger than sparks kept raining down and sprouted as they hit the ground. Bastian sat gazing at Moonchild. He had eyes for nothing else. He could not have said how much time had passed when Moonchild put her hand over her eyes. Why do you keep me waiting so long? He heard her ask.
Why did you make me go to the old man of Wandering Mountain? Why didn't you come when I called?
Oh. Bastian gulped. It was because, he stammered, I thought all sorts of reasons. Fear. Well, to tell you the truth, I was ashamed to let you see me. She withdrew her hand and looked at him in amazement.
Ashamed? Why?
Because, Bastian stammered, you must have expected somebody who was right for you.
What's wrong with you? Aren't you right for me?
Bastian felt that he was blushing. I mean, he said, somebody strong and brave and handsome. Maybe a prince. Anyway, not someone like me. He couldn't see her, for he had lowered his eyes, but again he heard her soft, lilting laugh. You see, he said, now you're laughing at me. There was a long silence, and when Bastian finally brought himself to look up, he saw that she was bending very close to him. Her face was grave.
Let me show you something, my Bastian. Look into my eyes.
Bastian obeyed, though his heart was pounding and he felt dizzy. In the golden mirror of her eyes, he saw, small at first, as though far in the distance, a reflection which little by little grew larger and more distinct. It was a boy of about his own age, but this boy was slender and wonderfully handsome. His bearing was proud and erect, his face was noble, maidenly, and lean. He looked like a young prince. And I'm not going to say this term because it's antiquated and it is not correct. He looked like a young prince of the desert. His turban was of blue silk, and so was the silver-embroidered tunic, which reached down to his knees. Children, pausing for a second. For anybody that watches, the Orient is not real. Oriental is not it's not a good term. It's a term grounded in racist, antiquated thinking, and it should never be used then, and it should never be used now. That was the word I had to skip over, so just to give some clarification for those who are wondering. His high boots, made of the softest red leather, were turned up at the toes, and he was wearing a silvery, glittering mantle which hung down to the ground. But most beautiful of all were the boy's hands, which, though delicately shaped, gave an impression of unusual strength. Bastien gazed at the image with wonder and admiration. He couldn't get enough of it. He was just going to ask who this handsome young prince might be when it came to him in a flash that this was his own self, his reflection in Moonchild's golden eyes. In that moment he was transported, carried out of himself, and when he returned he found he had become the handsome boy whose image he had seen. He looked down and saw exactly what he had seen in Moonchild's eyes: the soft red leather boots, the blue tunic embroidered with silver, the resplendent long mantle. He touched his turban and felt his face. His face was the same, too. Then he turned toward Moonchild. She was gone. He was alone in the round room which the glowing thicket had formed. "Moonchild!" he shouted. "Moonchild!" There was no answer. Feeling utterly lost, he sat down. What was he to do now? Why had she left him alone? Where should he go? That is, if he was free to go anywhere. If he wasn't caught in a trap. While he was wondering why Moonchild would have vanished without a word of explanation, without so much as a bidding him goodbye, his fingers started playing with a golden medallion that was hanging from his neck. He looked at it and let out a cry of surprise. It was Orin, the gem, the childlike empress's amulet, which made its bearer her representative. Moonchild had given him power over every creature and thing in Fantastica, and as long as he wore that emblem it would be as though she were with him. For a long while Bastien looked at the two snakes, the one light, the other dark, which were biting each other's tail, and formed an oval. Then he turned the amulet over, and to his surprise found an inscription on the reverse side. It consisted of 4 words in strangely intricate letters. Do what you wish. Ne'er powerful words were spoken. There had been no mention of such an inscription in the Neverending story. Could it be that Atreyu hadn't noticed it? But that didn't matter now. What mattered was that the words gave him permission, ordered him, in fact, to do whatever he pleased. Bastien approached the wall of luminous plants to see if he could slip through somewhere. To his delight, he found that the wall could easily be thrust aside like a curtain. Out he stepped. Excuse me. Thank goodness I have long arms. Whew, couldn't reach my cup. Hi, Mike. Thanks for watching. In the meantime, the night plants had kept on growing, gently but irresistibly, and Perilyn had become a forest such as no human eye had ever beheld. The great trunks were now as high and thick as church towers, and still growing. In places, these shimmering, milky white pillars were so close together that it was impossible to pass between them, and seeds were still falling like a shower of sparks. On his way through the luminous forest, Bastien tried hard not to step on the glittering seeds that lay on the ground. But this soon proved impossible. There simply wasn't a foot's breadth of ground from which nothing was sprouting, so he stopped worrying and went wherever the dying trees left a path open for him. Bastien was delighted at being handsome. It didn't bother him that there was no one to admire him. On the contrary, he was glad to have all the pleasure all to himself. He didn't care a fig for being admired by the lugs who had always made fun of him. If he thought of them at all, it was almost with pity. In this forest, where there were no seasons and no alternation of day and night, the feeling of time was entirely different from anything Bastien had ever known. He had no idea how long he had been on his way, but little by little his pleasure in being handsome underwent a change. He began to take it for granted, not that he was any less happy about it, but now he had the feeling that he had never been any different. For this there was a reason which Bastien was not to discover until much later. The beauty that had been bestowed on him made him forget little by little that he had ever been fat and bow-legged. Even if he had known what was happening, he would hardly have regretted the loss of this particular memory. As it happened, he didn't even realize that he had forgotten anything. And when the memory had vanished completely, it seemed to him that he had always been as handsome as he was now. And at that point, a new wish cropped up. Just being handsome wasn't as wonderful as he thought. He also wanted to be strong, stronger than anybody. The strongest in the world. While going deeper and deeper into the night forest, he began to feel hungry. He picked off a few of the strangely shaped, luminous fruits and nibbled gingerly to see if they were edible. Edible was no word for it. Some were tart, some were sweet, some were slightly bitter, but all were delicious. He ate as he walked, and felt a miraculous strength flowing to his limbs. In the meantime, the glowing underbrush around him had become so dense that it cut off his view on all sides. To make matters worse, lianas and aerial roots were becoming intricately tangled with the thicket below. Slashing with the side of his head as if it had been a machete, Bastian opened up a passage, and the breach closed directly behind him as if it had never been. On he went, but the wall of giant tree trunks blocked his path. Bastian grabbed hold of 2 great tree trunks and bent them apart. When he passed through, the wall closed soundlessly behind him. Bastian shouted for joy. He was the Lord of the Jungle. Let me repeat myself. Hold on. He was the Lord of the Jungle. So silly. For a while he amused himself opening paths for himself like an elephant that he was heard the great call. His strength did not abate, and he had no need to stop for breath. He felt no stitch at his side, and his heart didn't thump or race. But after a while he wearied of his new sport. The next thing he wanted was to look down on his domain from above, to see how big it was. He spat on his hands, took hold of a liana, and pulled himself up hand over hand without using his legs, as he had seen acrobats do in the circus. For a moment a vision, a pale memory of the past, came to him of himself in gym class, dangling like a sack of flour from the bottommost end of the rope. While the rest of the class cackled with glee, he couldn't help smiling. How they would gape if they saw him now. They'd be proud to know him, but he wouldn't even look at them. Without stopping once, he finally reached the branch from which the liana was hanging, climbed up and straddled it. The branch gave off a red glow. He stood up and, balancing himself like a tightrope walker, made his way to the trunk. Here again a dense tangle of creepers barred his way, but he had no difficulty in opening up a passage through it. At that height the trunk was still so thick that 5 men clasping hands could not have encircled it. Another, somewhat higher branch, jutting from the trunk in a different direction, was beyond his reach, so he leapt through the air, caught hold of an aerial root, swung himself into place, made another perilous leap, and grabbed the higher branch. From there he was able to pull himself up on still a higher one. By then he was high above the ground, at least 300 feet. But the glowing branches and foliage still obstructed his view. Not until he had climbed to twice that height were there occasional spaces through which he could look around. But the going became difficult because there were fewer and fewer branches, and at last, when he had almost reached the top, he had to stop, for there was nothing to hold on to but the smooth, bare trunk, which was still as thick as a telegraph pole. Bastian looked up and saw that the trunk or stalk ended some 50 feet higher up in an enormous, glowing, dark red blossom. He didn't see how he could ever reach it. He had to keep going, for he couldn't even very well stay where he was. He threw his arms around the trunk and climbed the last 50 feet like an acrobat. The trunk swayed and bent like a blade of grass in the wind. At length he was directly below the blossom, which was open at the top like a tulip. He managed to slip one hand between 2 of the petals and take hold. Then, pushing the petals wide apart, he pulled himself up. For a moment he lay there, for by then he was somewhat out of breath. But then he stood up and looked over the edge of the great glowing blossom as from the crow's nest of a ship. The tree he had climbed was one of the tallest in the whole jungle, and he was able to see far into the distance. Above him he saw the velvety darkness of a starless night sky, but below him, as far as he could see, the treetops of Paralin presented a play of colors that took his breath away. For a long time Bastian stood there drinking in the sight. This was his domain. He had created it. He was the Lord of Paralin, and once again he shouted for joy. And that is the end of this chapter, but many more to come, which we're actually getting to my favorite chapter in this entire book. It's actually my favorite chapters I consider them a part A and a part B because the way that the plot is set up for these 2 chapters, it's set in a specific area with a specific character that I have a lot of respect and admiration for. So I'll see you tomorrow night. Thank you all so much for watching. Like I said, you never have to watch these videos when they go live. You're always welcome to watch them in your leisurely time. Thank you all so much. I'll see you next time.